Hello, my name is Catherine and I am the social worker with the Caring for My COPD program at Grand River Community Health Center. In this video, I'm going to be going through our education session called Managing Tough Moments. And so this education session, if you're watching this video, hopefully you have the handouts, as I won't be going through the handouts piece by piece, but I'm hoping to elaborate on them, add a bit of information, and talk more specifically to the situation we're in now of this new way of doing things by video and phone. And so when we talk about managing tough moments, we're going to talk today about coping with ups and downs in mood, ups and downs in stress levels and worry, all of which are part and parcel of the human condition, whether or not you're diagnosed with COPD. None of us are immune to ups and downs in our mood, whether that's something, whether maybe we struggle on a more regular basis with low mood or depression, whether we struggle with managing worry or anxiety, or maybe these are experiences that we've had at times in our lives in relation to experiences we've had. Maybe we're experiencing some feelings right now since the onset of some of the more stringent requirements and recommendations for COVID-19 of physical distancing and doing things differently. Maybe we're having some new experiences of higher stress, worry, or anxiety. And all of these are normal. Like I said, none of us are immune to having some ups and downs in our mood or our stress levels throughout our lives in relation to experiences we are having. But it's an important thing for all of us to know. But for folks diagnosed with COPD, it can become especially important to be keeping an eye on your stress levels, your worry, and your anxiety, because as we'll talk today, all of those can have an impact on how well you're breathing. And how short of breath you might become during different activities. And so I have some notes I'm going to refer to. If you've watched my other videos, I'm going to be looking up and down. Hopefully I will maintain some decent eye contact. So we're going to talk a little bit today about talking about stressors versus stress. We'll talk about something called the anxiety breathlessness cycle, and talk about some strategies to try to interrupt that cycle and break it up. We'll talk a bit about relaxation and grounding as a means of trying to reduce or eliminate some of the stress that we might be feeling, again, especially right now or in general, just some strategies that you might choose to give a try. And so starting off, when we talk about stress, so I think stress has become quite a buzzword. Almost people like to wear it like a badge of honor, right? People want to talk about what they're stressed about, who's more stressed than who. Again, I don't think it's a competition that anybody should want to win. But for our purposes, stress isn't, so we can talk about stressors. Stressors are the things, the situations, the events, the people even, that cause us to experience stress. And so stress being the reaction that we have to whatever is going on in our lives. So that reaction might be the way that we feel. It may be the way that we think, the way we speak, the way we act, and oftentimes the ways that we respond to stressors, we can get pretty good at them. Whether they work for us or not, we might be really well aware, we may not. People in our lives might be really well aware of how we tend to be under stress, and that may work well for us or it may not, but it's probably pretty comfortable. It's easy, it's old and familiar, and it's a really easy groove to get into. And so when we think about some of the common stressors that folks living with COPD can encounter at different times throughout life, we can think about different types. We can think of personal stressors. So that could be health itself. So changes to diagnoses, an injury, a new illness. It could be changes in our financial status or working. Those changes in our working status. So whether we lose work, whether we've become unwell or had to go off on leave, we've retired, all of the above that can have a huge impact on who we understand ourselves to be. We can have environmental stressors, so then that could be things like changes in where we live or who we live with, changes in how we do things about the home. So maybe some of our abilities to perform some of the things around the home or in our day-to-day lives that maybe we used to do fairly easily before or took for granted and are becoming more of a challenge. And on a social level, social stressors, that's all the stuff that involves other people in our lives. So that's maybe difficulties in relationships, ending of relationships, loss of loved ones. It could be conflict as well, so difficulties, and all of those things. And like I said, and all those stressors, they come in different shapes and sizes. We may experience them at different times in life. Sometimes we may feel like we handle them pretty well, and other times not so well, because that stressor or that stress, even though we might have a really well-worn kind of signature of how we handle stress, it's also going to be very contextual to where we are at the time that we experience it. So how we cope with something today in the age of physical distancing and not having our regular routines might look very different than how we might handle it when we're able to move about more freely. We have access to our social support networks or even professional support networks in the way that we're used to having. And so when we have stressors come up in our lives, we can react to them in lots of different ways. And those reactions can be driven by different emotions that we might be experiencing. And so when we have a stressor, we can experience a fear-based response. And so when I talk about fear, I don't necessarily mean being afraid of something. For our purposes, fear is just noticing. It's noticing that something is happening that's causing us some upset, some discomfort, some sense of danger. It could be some sense of danger. And so fear is going to make us notice that something's not right here. It might make us kind of pause for a minute, think about what might be happening. So again, so if we use the example of thinking about COPD, if you were to become unwell and we're having increased shortness of breath, we want fear to notice that you're short of breath so that you can take steps you need to get the medical attention you need. Right? So whether that's you being able to call an ambulance yourself, whether it's being able, if need be, or if it's using your rescue inhaler, your pursed-lip breathing, using your strategies, using your support persons, again, to address that shortness of breath and get safe and be seen as you need to. When we think about an anxiety reaction, so like anxiety gets a bit of a bad rap. People think of anxiety, they think of often anxiety on the more troublesome, problematic, challenging end of things. But I think anxiety lives on a spectrum, and that spectrum can be pretty wide. And we all experience degrees of worry, stress, anxiety throughout our lives. And thankfully, we're usually pretty good at managing a lot of ups and downs in our lives, change and things that happen. And so anxiety kind of travels along that continuum. And so sometimes we might have a little bit of worry about something, but it feels manageable. Or maybe you've ever had the experience, if you're somebody who tends to procrastinate on things a little bit of worry or anxiety might be what's needed to kind of give us light that fire and get something done that maybe we've been putting off doing. But the thing about anxiety and worry is that when they go unchecked, or we are not managing them very well, it feeds itself really well. And so you may have had this experience, somebody who has, you start off kind of worried about one thing, Then you start getting worried about something else and something else. Then we start to worry if we're not worried enough. We're worrying if we're not worried about the right things. And that's all natural. And again, that worry, that none of us are immune. We all experience it. But the difference, when I think about anxiety being energy that we're using, energy, emotional and physical energy. There's a saying that, worrying about something for the sake of worrying is like sitting in a rocking chair trying to get somewhere. And so stewing on things and worrying for the sake of worrying doesn't usually get us anywhere. As opposed to, and we'll talk a bit more in a bit about ways that we might channel that anxiety or that energy into more productive things we could be doing to hopefully reduce some of the anxiety that we feel. And then when we think about, panic, so some of you watching this video may have had experiences with panic attacks. Some of you might not have. And so when we think about panic, we can think about fear or anxiety taken to the nth degree. And when panic happens, it can feel like it came out of nowhere, and it can feel like it's going to feel like this forever. But it won't. It won't. So again, if we think about energy and the energy that goes into panic, no one, COPD or not, has enough energy to live at a panic state all the time. There is a natural ebb and flow of energy that is happening that does create a ramping up to panic. Now, we might not notice it happening. We might be so caught up in our thoughts that we may not notice tightening or tensing signs in our body, that we're getting more agitated or elevated. We may miss some of those early signs. We may miss even if we're kind of just distracted or kind of stuck on one thought, we might not notice what else is going on in our mind that's also contributing to that panic. And so panic does come on, and then it unfortunately doesn't always disappear as fast as it feels like it came on, but it does have a natural crash cycle. It will come down. And so when we think about panic, if you are somebody who has experienced or does experience panic, it's worth considering what does and doesn't help you in those moments. Because sometimes when we think about panic, kind of it has a long hang time, that maybe we have people in our lives, hopefully very well-meaning people who care deeply, who want to coach you through, right? And they're just breathe or just relax. And sometimes that, it's not always so helpful. And so, people meaning really well can do a lot of things that don't help. So sometimes we might want to have some conversations about what we do or don't find helpful, and to give people in our lives permission to maybe step back if we need them to, or to give them some tools or some words that you actually find helpful so that they can feel helpful. In general, when we think about, like I said, kind of our signature response, or our signature stress response, it's an important thing to be aware of. So maybe, like I said, some of you might be really in touch with the things, the situations that cause you stress and how you typically tend to act under stress. Some of us might be less aware. We might be having knee-jerk reactions. We might be acting in kind of autopilot way, not quite sure or aware of what we're doing. Again, some of us might have gotten feedback from people in our lives, hopefully said lovingly, but a lot of constructive criticism can be offered. And so it can be worthwhile, though, just checking in with ourselves to get familiar, again, with how we typically tend to operate with stress, and to assess whether or not we're finding that helpful. Is that serving us well? Are we having trouble in relationships because of how we typically act or speak under stress? Are we having to do damage control, or do we feel like we have a pretty good handle on it? And just spending some time checking in once in a while about, where's my stress at right now? What, if anything, is kind of under my skin right now? It can be helpful too. Again, so instead of just maybe worrying or stewing about it, we can also spend some time to think about, is there anything that's in my control to do right now to try to reduce some of that stress, or even maybe eliminate one area or something that's causing stress, setting some limits and boundaries. All right, so next we're going to talk about the anxiety breathlessness cycle. And so we know that the hallmark symptom of COPD is shortness of breath. And when shortness of breath occurs, regardless of what's kind of led to that shortness of breath, we know that stress worry, anxiety come on board as well. And when anyone, COPD or not, gets highly stressed or anxious, we don't typically tend to breathe well. We tend to breathe more quickly and more shallow, so higher in the chest as opposed to deeper down through our diaphragm. And so when we breathe like that, again, any of us, if we breathe that fast and shallow for a period of time, that can actually create anxiety. And so we can have shortness of breath bring on anxiety, which then brings on more shortness of breath, but then brings on more anxiety. So if you're following, we can get into quite a bit of a cycle where they're feeding each other very well. And what can happen is, the other part of this cycle is that when you've had experiences of getting short of breath and anxious and short of breath, and you remember, you know where and what and when, what was happening the last time you got short of breath, is that you may find, and maybe you've had this experience, where you've started to avoid things. You've started to avoid certain activities, certain settings, certain situations, where you got short of breath because, and justifiably so, you don't want to repeat that experience. But the thing about when we start to avoid things, we don't typically avoid selectively. So we might start to avoid one thing, then we start to avoid another, and another, and another. And before we know it, we might be avoiding more than we're actually doing. The world has gotten very small. And then all the things that we do try to do are going to be a lot harder because we're just not doing as much. We might be losing some strength, some endurance, and you may in turn get short of breath because you've been out of commission. And so we talk about the cycle. And I find a lot of times we do this education session, folks can relate to this cycle. You know, you can place yourself in it. You can think of situations where this might have been factoring in. But I have a big, we want you to be aware. We want you to be aware that this is something that can happen. Because in general, if we're not aware of patterns or cycles or things that can happen in our lives, our ability to do much about them is pretty limited. And so in this case, when we are aware that this is a cycle that can happen, that we can be on the lookout for opportunities to break it, to disrupt it, to interrupt it as much as possible, to either prevent yourself from getting into the cycle or catching yourself in it early and getting out of it. So if we use this with an example, so say you have like a weekly card game that you love participating in. You enjoy it. It's with people you enjoy. It's part of your routine and it's wonderful. But say the last time you went to that game, you got short of breath. You know, you did what you needed to do. You got through that evening and you carried on. But you might find as each day goes by and you start anticipating, because you know that card game's coming because it's every week. You're thinking about it and you're thinking, well, what if it happens again? What if I do that again? Or we might tell ourselves it's going to happen again, right? And that's all valid. Again, so it's not about ignoring or pretending that you didn't get short of breath at the last game. No, that's not going to be helpful. We want to know that happened and it's valid to feel worry, concern, or some anxiety about it. But what we want to remember is that you have a choice. So next week, the game comes around. Again, one choice is you don't go, right? And maybe you don't go that week or the next week or the next week, right? But again, like I said before, we don't generally avoid selectively. So you might be avoiding that card game, but maybe you also haven't gone out to the store. Maybe you didn't pick up your own prescription. Maybe you canceled an appointment, right? So there may be a lot of other things that we might not have been doing. And so when you decide to go back to that card game, say 3, 4, 5 weeks from now, there's a whole lot of other stuff you haven't been doing. So that when you do go back to that game, it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of work, right? It's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of energy that you haven't really been using the last few weeks. And you may get short of breath because it's going to be a bigger effort than it was a month ago. So that's choice 1. Choice 2 is the card game comes up and we decide we're going to go. But again, we're not going to forget what happened last week. We're going to try to learn from it. We're going to think about, was there anything going on last week that was different or that wasn't ideal or that might have contributed to me being short of breath? We might think, oh shoot, usually when on my card game day, I try to keep the day pretty empty so that I can kind of rest, I can take my time. But you know what? I had a last minute appointment that got booked and I was running late and I was rushing. We might think, I was feeling a little under the weather last week. Maybe I wasn't feeling quite my best. Maybe somebody new came to the game and they didn't get the no perfume or cologne memo. And there they were with all kinds of scents that may be a trigger for you, right? So we want to check in to think, is there anything that was going on last week that maybe won't repeat this week anyways, or is in my control to do differently? To thinking almost like an experiment of maybe if I remove that factor or this factor or do this a little differently, maybe this won't repeat. It won't go the same. Does that make sense? So I just encourage you, again, just that you have choice. To remember, you have choice. And sometimes you may choose to not go to the game, right? You have that right. But just being careful that is a choice that's being made consciously and not just an automatic that's starting to happen, a habit, a pattern that may be leading us further and further into the cycle. All right. So the next part, I'm just going to talk a bit about kind of some tips and tricks and strategies for trying to break that cycle. And so the first being that, so this is from your handouts, just being aware of what causes you stress, what causes you worry, what causes you anxiety or upset, and to investigate it a bit. So just because we're worried about something, maybe you've noticed, doesn't mean that it's true, or doesn't mean that it's happening, doesn't mean that it will ever happen. But we can spend a lot of time and energy worrying about it, right? And so, again, we want to encourage what's on my mind. And is that something that I know for certain is happening or going to happen? Or is it something that might happen? And if it's something that might happen, it's worth taking note of. Don't ignore it. But then we have a choice to make about how much time and energy do I want to sink into something that's not really happening. Versus, if I know it's something that's going to happen, that instead of worrying about it, let's think about, is there anything I can do right now to reduce some anxiety, to reduce some worry, some things that are in my control, right? And similarly, we want to find some balance between worry, that again, part and parcel of the human condition. We're not going to get rid of it anytime soon. I wish I could say otherwise. But we want to do things you enjoy. Find times for relaxation, for some connection. And all of that might look really different right now. It might look really different, right? We might be, maybe we're used to being able to get together for the card game or time with family or friends that we're not doing right now, right? And so even though it might look different, it doesn't mean it can't be meaningful that, maybe we're rediscovering the phone. Maybe we're having Skype or FaceTime calls with family members or friends, sending emails, whatever it might be. We might be doing a lot of things, but that's all important. And again, it keeps us connected. It keeps the folks in our lives that matter most to us and that perhaps we matter most to as well, and that we can bring some relaxation and some enjoyment to each other's lives. And so would also encourage trying to focus on one thing at a time, because oftentimes when we start to worry about things, like I said, we might be worried about more than one thing. And if we try to tackle multiple things at once, we're not going to get very far. So similar to like the stress badge of honor people like to wear, I know people also like to talk about what good multitaskers they are. But here's the thing: our minds are not wired for multitasking. We're lucky that our minds can we can drive a car, sing along with the radio, and think about buying milk at the store. But that's about as deep as we're going into multiple tasks. We can't deeply sink into multiple tasks and really strategize and get some traction and changing things. We got to focus, and we might focus on the thing that's coming up soonest. Maybe we focus on the thing that we know for sure is happening. Maybe we focus on the easiest thing, and there's no shame in that. That if we have a few things on our plate, a few things causing us some worry, if there's a small fish that we can knock off that list, that's worth considering, because then it frees up some energy and some attention for the other things that might be harder. to do or might take more effort. We want to try to maintain a positive attitude. And when I talk about being positive, I'm not suggesting that we should all be Pollyanna in our lives, because that's not realistic. It's not sustainable. When I talk about being positive, again, this goes back to that idea of balance, that there will be things in our lives that challenge us. There will be things going on that weren't part of the plan, aren't how we want them to be, that may be causing us a great deal of stress and upset. And when things in our lives aren't going well, they can become all that we notice. And so our minds are pretty wonderful things. They can do a lot of great things, but they have some very old wiring. And they're wired for negativity. They're wired to notice problems, challenges, dangers, and they can zero in on that stuff like nobody's business. And even if that thing that's maybe not going so well, relatively speaking, is pretty small compared to everything else, our mind can blow it up and say, this is the most important thing on our plate. And when our minds do that, we ignore a lot of stuff. We ignore a lot of things in our lives that might be going really well. Support systems, living in a home that brings us comfort, belonging to communities that connect us and bring us relaxation and purpose. And a lot of those things that our mind might ignore might be the very stuff that helps us cope better with the stuff that's not going well, right? So again, positivity is just trying to keep things in balance, a balanced perspective that yes, there may be areas of life that are not going the way we wish they were, but that doesn't mean that that's everything. That there may also be things over here that are going better or well. That life is more often a both and situation rather than an either or. All right, and let's see. So I'm going to go on to the next. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some relaxation techniques. So, like I said, balance. So balance is a bit of a fleeting concept, but we know that there are always going to be things in life, generally, that can cause us stress and worry and upset. And I think right now, in the midst of COVID-19, there's a whole other layer of stress or worry or anxiety that's adding to that. And so, like I said, our bodies, I said earlier, our bodies, thankfully our minds, generally speaking, can handle some amount of stress. But that's not a place that our bodies and minds are meant to live all the time. And so they need a break. They need a break. And we can do that in different ways. We can do that, again, through connecting with people in our lives. However, we're doing that right now. Again, it may not look the exact same as it used to, but that doesn't mean that it can't be meaningful. That doesn't mean that it can't be important. It can't be a bright spot in the day or the week. We can do that with leisure and hobbies. So whether you have hobbies in your home, maybe it's things like crafting or doing puzzles, reading, a funny program. Maybe you enjoy, we're still a bit early, but like container gardening or different things you might do in the home that, again, just bring you some relaxation, that break up some of that stress. And we can do that. And so we can also use techniques. And so one technique we might use to relax our mind, relax our bodies, is just some breathing. And so I would encourage, using your pursed lip breathing that we talk about in program all the time, where, if you can, you breathe in through your nose and then breathe out through pursed lips. There's no hard set rule about how long you breathe in and out, but for pursed lip breathing, we encourage you to try to make your exhale longer than your inhale. Get out any of that old stale air that's gotten trapped. And so we recommend using this technique for so many things, right? We talk about it, when you become short of breath or you physically exert yourself. We can use it to prepare for physical exertion. We can also use it to recover from physical exertion. But we can also use it for emotional exertion, right? If we are going into a situation that we know could be difficult, we can use it. Similar, we find ourselves really worked up about something. And like I said, with that cycle, right? Maybe we've been stewing on something and then we realize I'm short of breath, right? That we can use pursed lip breathing to try to slow that breathing down, get that rhythm back. And so again, this is it's a back pocket technique that you've got with you all the time, should you choose to use it. So again, you can make it part of your routine, right? So whether in the morning, in the evening, midday, find some times in your day that just take 10 good pursed lip breaths as just a little like micro burst of relaxation. So we could do it as a routine, but again, we could also do it reactively. So we just realized we've just gotten stuck on something and it's gotten under our skin. 10 pursed lip breaths and just slow things down. Another thing we can use is visualization. So visualization essentially is just a fancy way of saying imagining. And so you might think, I've thought it before, I'm not very imaginative, imagination's for kids. But I would, let me challenge that idea. For anyone watching this video, have you ever, again, so let's think about worrying about something that hasn't happened, that may never happen, but we might think about 10 different ways that situation could, or is, as we think it is, going to go down, and then it never happens. It's imagination. We may not think of it that way, but we're dress rehearsing things all the time. And we, again, may dress rehearse things that may never happen. We may dress rehearse things that we know are going to happen. Maybe a difficult conversation we need to have, a phone call or an appointment, results that we're waiting on. And so the thing about when we imagine not great scenarios or worst case scenarios is that even though we're just imagining it or visualizing it, our mind is not very good at telling the difference between something that we imagine and something that actually happens. And so when we spend a lot of time dress rehearsing for the not so great, and we spend a lot of emotional and physical attention and energy on that. And it can be exhausting, right? And so if we think about, if we want to maybe try to use that imagination or visualization tool differently. So again, so it's not about being Pollyanna. I'm not suggesting now you have to or should imagine that all areas of your life are just sunshine and roses all the time. Because again, that's not real. That's not realistic or sustainable. But maybe a more balanced imagination. So if we're worried about something and we're imagining the 10 different most terrible ways it could go, that we imagine maybe it doesn't go quite that terrible. We could imagine it, whatever that situation is, going well, but we could also just manage it being kind of mediocre, right? It went this way. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't phenomenal. It was somewhere in the middle, and I coped with it. I managed it. I used my resources. I talked to who I needed to, and I was okay, and I could handle it. We could do it like that too. That just step it back from worst case. But we don't also have to go all the way back to just off the charts amazing either, right? Because that can set us up for disappointment, which is a whole other struggle that we can have unnecessarily. And so that's a couple of relaxation techniques. So the last couple of things I want to talk about is a couple of what we call grounding techniques. So again, these are things that we can use at times where we find ourselves really worked up, maybe really stressed, really anxious, having trouble kind of shaking off some of that energy or those thoughts. And we just need a little something to kind of just snap us out of it, if you will, to bring us back to where we are, what's actually happening right now, who might be right in front of us. My nose, sorry. And so one thing, again, so we could use breathing. We could use the pursed lip breathing as a grounding technique, again, to settle the body, settle the mind. And that's something, again, it's a physical thing we can do. Now, we can also do things with our minds. We can kind of, if we find our mind has just gotten looped on something, we can distract it a little bit with tasks that we have to come back to right now. We can't be 10 years down the road to do these things. And so one of them is just called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we kind of run through our senses. So we could say, you just check in with yourself. There's no right order. I'm just going to do it this order. But like 5 things I can see right now, 4 things I can hear, 3 things I can feel. We might say 2 smells that I like. And then we can finish with 1 kind thing I could say to myself right now. right? So it's not a long exercise, but it's something that we have to be thinking right now. We have to be looking around the room that we're in to do. Because if I'm worried about a doctor's appointment 6 months from now, I don't have a clue that there's, a box on the floor beside me, or because I'm not here. I'm just not here. And now we can also do other things, again, just to settle. So like another mental kind of trick, we could do kind of puzzles in our mind. So we could, I've met people who can do this. It's phenomenal. Say the alphabet backwards. I don't think that's ever going to be in my repertoire, but I've met people who can. And if you're one of them, kudos. We could also use the alphabet and think about something you like. So say you like geography, say you like gardening, whatever it might be, or whatever. Go through the alphabet and think of something in a genre that starts with each letter. Again, it doesn't have to be a super in-depth activity, but again, it's something that does take some focus now to do. And we can also, again, we think what kind of self-care strategies that we can use. So moving your body, whatever that looks like. So maybe you've been making use of some of the videos that Laura has posted. Maybe there's things you do around your home. Maybe it's just walking within your home. Maybe you are getting outside, as the weather is improving. Maybe you're getting out for some walks. Listening to music that we enjoy, either music that makes us feel happy, music that just relaxes us. Savoring a beverage that we enjoy, cold, hot or cold, so a cup of tea or coffee, or just something that we enjoy, and just really sinking into that beverage or that treat or that snack and really enjoying it, and noticing that we're having it. And again, it brings, and just connecting with the people that matter most to us, that maybe when things are regular are part of our self-care. They're part of our day-to-day routine. They're part of what we do. And so checking in with, are you missing anybody right now? And we might be, and I mean, when I mean by missing, folks that we haven't figured out a way yet to connect with and to still be part of each other's day-to-day or week. And thinking about what are some options to try to increase that connection, to get back in each other's routines. Again, to offer the things that we offer to each other most of the time when things are, again, business as usual. So I think that wraps up my notes. I think I've rattled on long enough. If there's anything in this video, though, that you want to talk about more, you'd like to talk about more personally, you're interested in techniques or strategies or practicing things, please feel free to reach out to myself or any member of the team, and I would be happy to get on the phone with you and talk more personally. Please take good care of yourselves, and I'm sure I'll be back with another video.